Well, you asked the question yesterday about the next step on the Buddhist path. And it's kind of a contradiction in terms in a way, because the whole concept of progress is kind of an illusion. It's kind of a Western term that we're sort of programmed, like from the time we're kids, that go to school and get good grades so you can get into a good college and then a good graduate school and then get a good job and so on. Then you're going to work your way up, and that there's a progression, and but in the consciousness area of consciousness, it's not necessarily a linear progression. So if you think what Buddha went through, he didn't take a course or something, or a series of courses, So we're really all Buddhas waking up, So it's so easy to become sort of seduced by this idea that if I take a series of courses, I'm going to become more enlightened, or a series of empowerments. And that's what's happened a lot in the West. You'll see organizations, Tibetan Buddhist organizations, where there's a lot of emphasis on, first you do your nundro, which is a preliminary practice. You do the 100,000 prostrations and 100,000 this and 100,000 that. And then you're at the beginning, you're at like square one or step one. And then you take a certain initiation like Vajrakalaya or whatever. It seems like almost an endless stream of empowerments. And you go to some of these organizations and they will say, what level have you reached, or which empowerments have you had? And then you can only take this empowerment next, And I remember there was a high Tibetan Lama coming from Tibet that I wanted to meet. And I think he was going to be in Halifax, Nova Scotia, giving a talk. And I would have flown from California there to meet this guy, or just to hear him talk, because he was the real deal, So I emailed the organization, it was the Shambhala organization. And they said, oh, you haven't gone to seminary, which is a program they have in the summer where you get really full Buddhist training, And then after seminary, you would need to have this other empowerment and so on. So they said, basically, you don't qualify to hear him talk, I thought, gee, that's really sad, because I traveled, I wandered all over Tibet, and every monastery I went to, I was welcomed in. They had me sit down and gave me tea, and I could sit there and chant with the monks and participate in their ceremonies. It's only when I came to the West that they put this heavy emphasis on this progression of empowerments and practices that you have to have, And so there's this idea that if you've completed a certain number of empowerments and initiations, that you're sort of higher up on the rung of Buddhahood, which is not really true. In fact, I found a lot of those people were very egotistical. They'd wear a little pin that showed them what level they had reached, and everyone was looking at each other's pin. Oh, I see you've reached that level and you've taken this empowerment or that empowerment. And it really avoids the essence of what Buddha was teaching, And all those empowerments don't necessarily bring you any closer to enlightenment. Enlightenment can happen spontaneously. Like I had an experience. I'd only been on the spiritual path about a year, and I was shoveling manure on a friend's farm. And I went into a state of samadhi, absolute bliss, where there was no self. And there was no empowerment or initiation into that. It was just time for me to experience that, and I did, and but that gave me the vision of what I wanted to be able to learn how to attain on my own, so there are practices that you can do that facilitate that kind of awakening, So of course, the basic one is the Vipassana, which is roughly the practice that Buddha himself used. I mean, he tried all kinds of things. And basically, he was looking for how to end suffering and the causes of suffering, and how to achieve happiness and the causes of happiness. And that's something each person needs to look for within themselves, So it's this process of self-inquiry and self-observation. And what facilitates that is first to slow down the mind, which he suggested using the breath for. Now, I met a guy who said, what do? You seem different than other people I know. This guy was actually a sheriff in the county here. And I said, well, I practice meditation. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, I slow down my mind and I go into this place of timeless awareness. And he said, oh, I go fishing on Saturdays and I throw the hook in the water. I lean back against the tree. And next thing I know, an hour has passed. I don't remember what happened, but I have answers to a lot of questions. And a lot of my problems have disappeared. So, or for me, it was shoveling manure. It gave me a rhythmic practice. Or, Ram Dass found a woman in the audience at one of his talks, and he said, what is your spiritual practice? And you seem to understand everything I'm saying. And she said, I crochet, and just that rhythmic knitting focused her mind. But the breath is built in. It's like a mantra that's going all the time. So just to sit and observe that, with good posture, with the spine straight and the tongue against the roof of the mouth. You can keep the eyes open just a little bit, looking down. And just feel the rise and fall of your chest. And your attention is focused on this area. You just feel that. And gradually you can feel like there's a light there. But it's more just the sensation of being centered there. And then as you're doing this, thoughts will come up, or feelings, or emotions. And you're just observing them. They're not good or bad. It's just a movie that you're watching, And as you do this, you may get insight into those thoughts, that you see them from a different perspective because you're not identified with them anymore, that you're seeing them sort of outside themselves, But gradually, you then ask, you realize there's an observer. There's someone observing the thoughts. You're not identified with them. And that's your Buddha mind, or what we call divine mind. You realize that there is another self that's unlimited in consciousness, just observing the human self. And that's really the path the Buddha had right there. And you don't need initiations or empowerments. Buddha didn't have initiations or empowerments. And he found that it was not doing some extreme practice that got him there. He tried many different extremes of, fasting and doing all kinds of austerities. And then he gradually formulated what's called the middle path, where you could be sort of a normal person, but still do the self-observation. So it kind of comes back to, don't feel you need to go to a lama for another empowerment. Some of these practices are very useful and may be helpful, but it's really showing you the same thing, just with different clothes. In this process of awakening, or self-observation, it's good to look at the things that are holding you back. Like you said the other day, you'd like to give like a workshop where a lot of people are invited, but you're afraid you might not be able to handle it, or there was a lot of self-doubt, right? About whether you could handle it, Like you said, I could handle maybe one person coming, but if you got up to 6 people, I might freak out, or, that might be overwhelming. So who is it that would be overwhelmed? That's just the ego, right? So you can look at that in meditation, see yourself in a certain role or doing something, and then where is the voice coming from that says, I can't do that, or I'm not ready, Or look at, I would like to start a business. I would like to start something new. What is it that's holding me back? What are the doubts and the fears? To really look at those problems in meditation, not just use the meditation only for so-called like enlightenment, but to clear the obstacles in daily life. So that's very, very fruitful practice, to say, well, I remember there was a time we had to recite poems in, 6th grade or something. And I was very, very shy. So I could recite the poem at home or recite it in front of my mother, and I had it perfect. I had memorized the poem, but then I had to get up in front of the class and recite it. And after the second line, my mind went blank and I was in a state of terror, and I felt everyone looking at me. And I felt all the thoughts and the projections and everything. And, I really had a hard time. Then I think I stumbled through it, but I left out a few lines or whatever. But there was a real feeling of panic, and being unworthy and not being on the same level as other people and things like that. But if I could have meditated on that first, and looked at the fear, what is the fear of being in front of a group? That would have really helped, So now I can be in front of a group without that fear, even if I have nothing to say, because I sat in front of some of the greatest gurus in India, Neem Karoli Baba and so on, and many other great yogis whose names we don't even know, who could work miracles, and they didn't even talk, They didn't feel obligations to say anything. Neem Karoli Baba, who was Ram Dass's guru, he could just kind of lounge around, wearing just a cloth around his waist, with his hairy chest and big belly hanging out, and not say anything, not give any teachings, yet he had a whole crowd of Westerners around him worshiping him. And it was just the energy that he emanated, you know. And I wouldn't say even I felt this tremendous energy emanating from him, but he served as a focal point for the guru, which leads to your other question, who is the guru? So the guru is actually within you, and any real guru will point you to that, you know. It's what in Tibetan Buddhism they call the Vajra guru. Vajra is the indestructible awareness, you know, which is with you all the time. Even though sometimes we feel we don't have access to it, it's still there. And so that's how lessons come to you spontaneously. It can come through a dog or a flower or an ant or whatever, or a conversation with a friend. You just have one of those aha moments where you have a sudden realization. And that's the guru, you know. But some people feel that they want a person as the guru. And even if that person is not enlightened, somehow they can serve as a focal point for that, you know, for that consciousness. Like I knew a guy whose guru sent him to New York City back in the 70s and said, I want to do an experiment, you know, just dress up a certain way, dress all in white and wear a turban and put posters around town that you're going to have satsang, which is this kind of meditation question answer format, you know, every Thursday night at 7 o'clock. And you don't have any personal problems. Never talk about something that you're going through. You know, don't talk about yourself at all. But let people come up and ask questions. And whatever question someone asks, just say, who is it that wants to know that? Or who is trying to find that out, you know? And people have this aha, oh, I get it, you know, that I'm not the question. I'm not the one seeking the question. They kind of realize that there's a higher self, you know? And that's what a lot of the Advaita teachers do. That's basically the reply to any question, you know, who is it that wants to know? Which is kind of the basic question, like that Maharaji asked me one day, you know, who are you? And I said, no, I've been sitting there for a month. You just noticed me now? That's not what he meant. He meant, who are you? Like more like, what are you? You know, which really then, that got me thinking, you know, who is sitting here? Who is observing? Who is projecting on him the role of guru, you know? So like you're having realizations all the time. That's the inner guru, you know? But there are some people you can go to and teachings just come through them, you know? But that's only because you're in touch with the inner guru, really. But everybody has that ability, you know. Does that make sense? There's that old joke, the words guru is spelled G-U-R-U. So to realize that the guru is a reflection of your own I am presence. I say I am presence, that's the Atman or your higher self or your true self, you know, or what the Buddhists would call your Dharma Kaya. Kaya means body. So the body of the Dharma, that's like your indestructible self that takes on many different embodiments over time. You know. So the spiritual path does not have to be really complicated. You don't have to study theosophy and learn what the different initiations are and so on. You know, it's just really about waking up to who you really are, which is something you can do in daily life, but having a basic sitting practice is important. And sitting down and looking at those uncomfortable things. Or the question is, why is it that this person has this problem with me? Or what is the theme that comes up in my life? What is something that I've been struggling with my whole life? Where is that coming from? Where is that fear that I'm not good enough to do what I really want to do? So I'm not this ego struggling with these things. So the practice should be, really getting beyond that ego, and observing where that is coming from. Ego is basically a survival mechanism that it's there to preserve the physical body and the psychological body and so on to function among other people. But you have to realize that's not really you, it's just a mechanism. So you had another question. Yeah, well, let's say you feel your mission is to be a healer, and you want to put yourself out to make that service available. So one question arises, can you guarantee everybody will be healed? No healer can guarantee that. I use the example of as a healer, but it could be anything. CEO of a company, let's say I was just appointed to be chairman of the board of a company, and they're going to have the first meeting, they're going to be a dozen members of the board, present, and I have to give a presentation, and they're going to be judging me, evaluating me, saying, did we make a good choice? Should we replace him with somebody else? So there's fear, but as a healer, what if I don't heal somebody? Will that lower my self-esteem as a healer? Can I still claim to be a healer? What if I only heal 3/4 of the people? Is there some fear about presenting myself as a healer? What if someone says, you charged me for a healing, but I'm not healed? How does that make you feel? So it comes down to trust, basically, dealing with all fear. Like, am I going to have enough money to pay the rent or to eat or buy gas for the car or something? There's fear around that. There's an expression I've heard, fear, the letters F-E-A-R, is false evidence appearing real. It's not necessarily even false evidence. It does take money to buy gas and stuff. You do need money. But have you had a time in your life when you didn't have enough, And I can say, yes, I did have a time where I was homeless. It didn't last very long, but I know that it was part of a plan to teach me something, to learn compassion, that the masters were there with me all the time. And even in that, I still had enough to eat, It just came to me through unusual ways, And so again, it's just, once you find the real self, then you don't have to worry anymore. So what is the worst thing that could happen? That I would die, but there is no such thing as death. I experience stepping out of my body, out of the physical body, and I'm still here, or going to higher planes. So I know if I stepped out of the physical body, or if this body didn't wake up in the morning, I would still be here. In fact, I'd have a lot less problems. I wouldn't have to worry about, rent or food, or, paying the utility bills, or doing webinars or things like that. Editing videos, they wouldn't have to worry about that. So then there's also, you can say, fear of suffering. That's more real fear, But then again, you still have to trust that there is a plan for your life. And I trust I will not have to go through that unless it's something that I'm meant to experience. So anyway, the fears do decrease as the more you know who you really are, that you're in touch with that light within, and to trust that the God presence is with you all the time, that you're not going to experience anything that's not part of the divine plan that you agreed to experience in this lifetime. Once you know who you really are, then you trust in that. That's reality, that's who you really are. Nobody can take that away from you. One day I was driving into town and the car shut off at a stop sign out in the middle of the desert. So I trusted, I said, God knows that I'm here, and please bring somebody to help me. Well, the second car that came by was a young guy in a pickup truck. He said, are you okay? And I said, well, my car stopped. And he said, let me jump start you. He said, sounds like your battery is low. He got me started up the car. He said, you drive 5 miles down this road and bear to the left, there's an auto parts store and you can get a battery there. And I did that. They installed the battery and then I was fine. But, there was that moment, what am I going to do? But I didn't really feel any fear. It was just, this is going to be interesting, see how God handles this. So I think it's, once you realize there's a plan for your life, that's the whole thing. It's not just an accident, you're being here, you're not just a spore of mold growing in the bottom of the sink, under the sink or something. You are a God being that came here as part of the divine plan. You were born to the right parents at the right time. And everything is unfolding the way it was meant to, So the more you meditate and tune in to that divine presence, the more you trust in that plan. Meditating on that presence, feeling it right here, that's like your anchor or your life jacket in the ocean. You won't sink because it's there all the time. Well, I would say if faith means trust, then that's fine, that's good. I'm used to hearing faith like in association with certain religions where you have faith in the dogma or faith that somebody is going to save you, which is more a belief system. It's not actually knowing. If you know the truth, you don't have to have faith. Faith is someone told someone told you that there's a plan for your life, or that you're taken care of, or you shouldn't worry, or God is going to take care of you. And you want to believe that, so you'll say, okay, I'll believe in that. I have faith that what you said is true, but you haven't really experienced it, So knowing is knowing that that presence is there all the time, then you don't need to have faith, See, Neem Karoli Baba, I wanted him, I heard Ram Dass's story, and I wanted someone like that who would say, oh, Peter, at last you found me. And then he would tell me a whole bunch of stuff about my life to prove that he knew all about me and loved me anyway, even though I'd messed up or whatever. And that if I ever needed direction, I could go to him and say, what do I do next? You know, and so on. But he refused to play that role for me. In fact, he even picked up a rock and acted like he was going to throw it at me. It's like, get out of here, you know. Of course, when I got far enough away from him, then he waved. But so I know that there was love, deep love behind that. So he was the compassionate parent who sometimes has to be wrathful, you know. And he wouldn't give me the answers, you know, when where should I go and what should I do? He'd say, get out of here. Drink your tea and get out of here. You know, he gave me a cup of tea. The cup was leaking, dripping hot, sticky liquid all over me, and said, drink that and then leave. Said, yeah, but you haven't told me, you're my guru. You haven't told me where to go and what to do. Jiao, jiao means get out of here. And Krishnadas had the same experience. And kind of as he was leaving, he said, I know, I'll sing to you. So that was, see, from his own inner guru, he was getting, that was his role in life, was to sing, you know. That Maharaji didn't say, sing to me, you know. It was his choice. That was his plan for his life, you know. So. Well, when you get still, you feel some feeling rising up in you. You know, and if you analyze it, you can analyze it to death and then it goes away. But if it's real, then it will come back again. So just trusting that, you know, analyzing a situation is not necessarily going to bring you to the truth, you know, or it's not going to give you the guidance of what you need to do. You know, if you follow the feeling in your heart, the guidance comes through there, really. Or you might, you know, hear an inner voice, but those voices can be very deceptive, you know. Could be the voice of the ego, a voice of a parent or a friend or something like that, or some discarnate entity, you know, pretending to be a master or something. But you, in the end, it doesn't mean that that inner voice is false. Sometimes you'll hear the inner voice, which is the voice of your higher self, but you test it. You start to move in the direction that it tells you to go, and it's either going to feel better or worse. If the energy builds and the energy is sustained as you move in that direction, then you follow it, you know. But if you start to do what it says and it doesn't feel good, then, you know, you can try again and again, but it still doesn't feel good. So then you don't, you know, that was a false voice, you know. I know people almost died on the mountain because some channel in LA told them they were going to save the planet by sealing the aura. They had to, sealing the aura of the planet, they had to go up on Mount Shasta and plant crystals up there. Well, they got lost in a snowstorm in the spring. They couldn't set up their tent. They couldn't cook anything. They almost died, you know, and 2 days later, they managed to come down the backside of the mountain and a construction crew found them. But see, they weren't, nobody in their right mind would have gone off in a snowstorm, you know, on the mountain like that. They were just following that this channel had told them to do that, you know. I begged them not to go. You couldn't see 15 feet in front of you, the snow is coming down so hard. They said, no, we're doing this to save the planet. I had an invitation a long time ago to go to San Francisco to have Thanksgiving at a relative's house, and I said, sure, I'd love to go, which I think I had done the year before. And I came to a fork in the road, and I just had the strongest feeling to turn left, Well, turning left would have taken me east out toward, Eastern California and Nevada. I mean, the sign was for Reno, or I think it was first Susanville probably, and then Reno. But anyway, it was not the way to get to San Francisco. So I stopped there. I pulled off to the side of the road and said, what is going on here? Like, my cousin is expecting me in San Francisco. What should I do? And the car, like, it just did not want to go straight. It was just this feeling to go that way. So I said, well, I will test it. I'll start driving that way and see how it feels. And immediately when I made the left turn, I felt great. Lots of energy. I felt happy. So, I drove for a couple of hours and I said, this is really happening. I thought maybe I was just going to take a detour and then loop back in somehow to the freeway and go down to San Francisco by some other route. But finally, I got to I think it was Winnemucca, Nevada, some town in Nevada. I stopped and used the phone and called my cousin and said, something has come up. They didn't understand the concept of guidance at all, and they had a lot of judgments about the way I lived my life, and because I didn't follow a linear path, So I said, I'm not going to be able to make it. Something has come up. I said, I have the guidance to go east instead of south. And he said, well, we should have known. That's sort of par for the course. And they hung up. So I finally ended up driving all the way to New York, And that's when I was given the masters appeared. The ascended masters appeared to me and gave me the book, I Am the Open Door. Which would not have happened if I'd gone to San Francisco, stayed with my cousins, you know what I mean? Yeah. There was actually another time again, my poor cousins, happened with them where I was like, they had a wedding. One of my cousins was getting married, and I drove the mother of the groom to the temple where the wedding was to take place. Then I had to go park the car. And on the way back, I heard, do not go to the wedding. I said, I can't do that. But I walked in, they had a seat reserved for me, front row center, to sit with the mother of the groom. And I saw the father of the bride at the back. He was ready. They were ready. They were just waiting for me to get there to start the service. I handed him the car keys. And I said, the car is parked on the corner. I can't attend the service. I'm sorry. And he looked at me like, what do you mean you can't? You're here. Stay, sit down. There's a seat waiting. I said, I'm sorry. I can't explain. I have to leave. So I left and I thought, Saint Germain, what are you doing? What is happening? Or beloved higher self, come forth. So I kept calling to Saint Germain, who is, has been my teacher for many years. I am God directed and God commanded. I am being guided to go where I meant to go and do what I meant to do. So I kept walking, and all of a sudden, I came to a street corner, And coming toward me from the other corner was a man that I'd met in Mount Shasta. And he looked up and he said, "Thank God." He said, "I was just praying to Saint Germain to show me if I should not commit suicide." He said his wife had just left him and he was going back to his apartment to commit suicide. And he said, "Saint Germain, if you don't want me to commit suicide, send somebody. Either you come in person or send somebody to help me." So he lived nearby. This was now blocks from where the wedding was to be. I had been like levitated there. I had no idea where I was. We went to his apartment and I talked to him for several hours until he snapped out of the depression, and he said he was okay then, that he was doing all right. And I left, and of course, so once again, I had disappointed my family. And since that time, I really was sort of an outcast in my family. But I saved, they didn't understand. I said, I saved somebody's life who was going to commit suicide. They ignored that completely. All they heard was, I didn't attend the wedding. So you get severely tested sometimes. Sometimes it seems like something smaller, like I'm on my way to the post office driving, and I'll hear, "Turn left here." And I said, "Why left? The post office is straight ahead." But I follow it. I know to follow that. So I turn left, and then suddenly there's a parking spot. And I hear, "Park there." And I park. Why am I parked here? So I get out of the car, and then somebody comes up and says, "Oh, Peter, I was looking for you. I came to town hoping I didn't have your phone number, but I was praying to run into you because I have a serious question I need to talk to you about. And that's why I had the feeling to turn left and to park, was to meet that person, So it's beautiful when you can trust in that. And you build up that trust by meditating on that feeling, whether you call it the presence, the jyoti, the unfed flame, God, the inner sun, whatever you want to call it. There's a feeling in the center of your chest, which is, where the light is that gives you life. Like what makes your heart beat is that light sending out a signal, the bioelectric current going beat, 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 and breathe and so on. And you can feel it right there in the center of your chest, It's like when I ask you, "Who are you?" You don't go, "Who me?" or "Who me?" You go, "Who me?" You feel it right there. It's the sense of I. So you meditate on that and then ask, who is that, or what is that? That's the focal point of your true self, and that will still be there after you die because it's who you are. So now we're all enlightened. Yeah, but that surrender can take many forms. The surrender can be signing a contract to do a job, that, you want to be footloose and fancy free and come and go every moment as you want. But, the guidance might be to make a commitment to follow a certain path. And that's how the surrender looks, that I'm going to work at this job until I get the guidance not to, but that's the surrender, like the masters told me when I came to Mount Shasta, I wanted to ascend, and I was camped on the mountain calling for my ascension, and the masters said, "We want you to get into real estate." And they showed me these houses and introduced me to people and so on. then a few days later, I met the guy that introduced me to, and he said, "Are you interested in real estate?" And I said, "Well, I had a dream that I was to get into it. So I spent my life savings buying these old houses, and I had no business background at all. Suddenly I'm immersed, I'm a landlord, like a slumlord, having to deal with tenants and lawyers and building inspectors and, all those kind of things. So I had to surrender to the commitment to follow that path, which really lasted a couple of years. I saw that it was a lesson in mastery, that there were certain human lessons I needed to learn. One day I asked Saint Germain, well, I said, when can I get out of this? And he said, when you've learned the lessons. And I said, what are the lessons? He named them 1, 2, 3. One was learn to say no, to have a boundary, One was to be responsible with money and, to keep your word, even in very, very small things, So I was tested. I said, okay. And he said, okay, I'm going to test you. So over the next couple of weeks, I was tested on all 3 of those things, and I passed them. And then after that, I could get out of real estate, But then there are other tests, like like in relationship, you make a commitment to be with another person. You can't just say every moment, I'm doing my own thing, because what you do is affecting the person you're living with. So to acknowledge there's advantages to being together, but there's also tests and challenges and compromises. And you can't just say, I'm committed to God, I'm going to do what I want to do at every moment. So there are personal sacrifices we make in order to interact with other people, to be a reliable person. So I think that's an illusion people have when they get on the spiritual path, is just to not make any commitment, to say every moment, I'm going to just be spontaneous and do whatever I feel like doing. Buddha talked about attachment, and he said basically that's the cause of suffering, especially attachment to the pursuit of what we consider to be pleasurable, which in the end sometimes turns out not to be pleasurable, to have certain unforeseen consequences, So it's the attachment to samsara that he was talking about, and samsara is the belief that things in the human world are going to make you happy. A certain situation, if I could only have this certain situation, then I would be happy. And you may spend many, many years or even your whole life trying to create that situation. And then, maybe you get the situation, then it turns out it doesn't make you happy. Like my stepfather worked on Wall Street for, 50 years. And he had a bucket list. So when he retired, he'd go do all these things that he thought would make him happy. But then as he did them, he found they didn't really, either he wasn't healthy enough to enjoy the experiences, or when he actually had the experience, it didn't bring him the happiness he had anticipated, He always wanted to go on a safari in Africa, not to shoot anything, to photograph, but then he went on the safari, but then there were ants, or bugs or whatever, or it wasn't comfortable. It didn't bring him the happiness he thought it would, So imagine living your whole life to do something, postponing all of the things that you wanted to do, just to hold on to that one job. so that you can do all these things, and then you find out they don't bring you happy. That's kind of a perfect example of samsara, the pursuit of some kind of illusory pleasure, But all that is kind of solved if you can just surrender to the presence, or, another way to say, when you are in the Buddha consciousness, to follow the guidance that comes to you, then that doesn't mean just sitting there staring at the ground for your whole life, that we think that's what Buddha did, but he actually walked around quite a bit, or being like Jesus, who also had the consciousness of a Buddha, but he walked around interacting with people and teaching. But maybe somebody else's path is to start a high-tech company as a Buddha, and provide a service to humanity. So once you are in tune with your Buddha nature and you can get that guidance, then there's no sense of attachment at all. But see, we can be attached to even an idea, the attachment to the concept of freedom, that freedom is not necessarily doing whatever I want to do at every moment. If it's the ego that wants to do it, you know what I mean? And everything you do in the world has consequences. And when you're dealing with other people, you're in a human situation where they have expectations. So, if you say, I expect my family to be there for me all the time, no matter what, and not have to give them any explanation or demand that they accept unconditionally whatever I'm doing, but then to say I have no responsibility toward them whatsoever, that's also an attachment too. It's not, it's an illusory thing. Well, I'm not attached to anything. Yes, you are. When you go somewhere, you're creating sort of vortexes or whirlpools of energy. People are expecting you, and they expect you to behave a certain way, and taking responsibility for your actions, that we're all in relationship with each other. And we can't just skim the cream off the top and then, when we finish the cream, say, well, I'm on my way now. I'm going to another situation to skim the cream off of that situation, Like the people you interact with develop certain expectations based on signals you've given them. And then if you don't follow through on the signal, then they may feel disappointed. Then you've created disappointment or sadness. And then that's like maybe some karmic situation that you've created, So it's like being aware at every moment how you're affecting other people. So if your actions come from the Buddha awareness, then that's fine. You're not attached to the outcome one way or the other. But if it's coming from personal desire or the illusory concept of I'm a free soul, I can do whatever I want at any moment, then we're creating more suffering. Like I heard of a woman just recently in the Ukraine that had a child. There was a long line to get on a train to get out of the country. And she went to the front of the line and she said, I have a baby who's sick. I need medical help that's waiting for me. Would you let me in front of the line? And everyone did, But if she just pushed in front without explaining it, it would have created animosity. It is what it is. Well, life is not just a random happening. What's happening on Earth has been known. The outcome has been known for a long time. And to put the attention on the light, especially the light within, and to trust in that you're going to be at the right place at the right time, and not to dwell on the illusion of the appearances of things, not to dwell on the news. It doesn't mean not to know what's going on, but not to dwell on it and not to become depressed or angry about it. To trust in the inner presence and know that God is real and that God presence is within you. And when you say, I am, you call that presence forth. So I think that really wrap it up.